When I finally asked my son when we'd lay his father to rest, he looked at me with those hollow eyes and whispered, "I buried him yesterday." In that instant, my world stopped breathing. The kettle had boiled dry again. I stood there in the kitchen, watching the thin column of steam fade into nothing, realizing I'd been staring for minutes. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood polish, the way it always had when he was alive. My husband, Richard, used to tease me for letting the kettle whistle too long. Now, the silence after its whistle felt unbearable. The house was too neat, too quiet, too polite. Every cushion in its place, every photograph dusted but turned slightly away from me, as if even the pictures couldn't bear to look anymore. I kept thinking if I could just keep moving, wipe another counter, fold another towel, I wouldn't have to feel the heavy truth pressing on my chest. Richard was gone. And yet it didn't feel real. There'd been no funeral yet, no closure. Just a blur of condolences and casseroles from neighbors I barely knew. The one person I wanted to talk to, our son, had been distant since the day it happened. Daniel barely came home. He'd mutter about taking care of things and disappear for hours. I told myself he was grieving in his own way, but deep down I was scared. Scared of the silence that had grown between us, thick and unnatural. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds. I picked up Richard's sweater from the chair, navy blue worn at the elbows, and pressed it to my face. It still smelled faintly of him. Soap, smoke, and peppermint. I felt my throat close. Across the room, the clock ticked too loudly. Sounded like a heartbeat fading into memory. I wanted Daniel to come home. Not just for company, but to feel like we were still a family, still tethered to something real. Hey there, my dear family and friends. If you're already tuned in and ready to enjoy this story, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because tomorrow I'll be bringing you another story just as captivating, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Now back to the story. Across town, Daniel sat alone in his old pickup truck parked by the edge of the cemetery. The headlights were off. His hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles raw, nails rimmed with dirt. The kind of dirt that doesn't wash away easily. He hadn't cried at the hospital. He hadn't cried when the undertaker came. He'd told himself that men didn't cry when they had to be strong. But now, sitting there with rain dripping off the brim of his cap, he realized that strength felt a lot like punishment. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." The words were swallowed by the storm. For weeks, he'd tried to shield his mother from everything. The paperwork, the coffin, the decision about burial. She looked so fragile, barely eating, barely sleeping. He thought if he could just handle it all himself, maybe she could rest. Maybe it wouldn't destroy her the way it had destroyed him. But the lie of protection had its own weight. He stared down at his hands again, remembering how he'd shoveled earth until his shoulders burned, alone under the gray dawn. He thought of her face when she'd eventually ask about the funeral. He didn't know what he'd say. How could he tell her that he'd already buried the man they both loved? Without her, without ceremony, without goodbye. Back in the kitchen, I heard the front door creak. My heart jumped. "Daniel!" called softly. No answer. Just the sound of wet boots on the floorboards. When he appeared in the doorway, my chest tightened. He looked older somehow, his face pale, hair damp from rain. His eyes, once bright and golden like his father's, now looked dull and distant. "You're soaked," I said automatically, reaching for a towel. He shrugged, voice rough. "It's just rain." He didn't look at me. I wanted to say I miss him. I wanted to ask why you keep disappearing. But the words caught in my throat, tangled in fear. So instead, I asked the only thing I could manage. "Did you talk to the funeral director?" He froze. For a moment, the sound of the rain outside filled the space between us. Then he exhaled, a long, tired sigh that seemed to empty the air in the room. "Mom!" He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. Something heavy stirred in my stomach. "Daniel," I whispered. "When's the funeral?" His eyes finally met mine. There was something in them I couldn't name, something between guilt and relief. His voice broke when he spoke. I buried him yesterday. The towel fell from my hands. The words didn't register at first, like they'd been spoken in a foreign language. What? He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I buried him. Yesterday morning. The room tilted. I could hear the rain, the clock, the creak of the floor, but it all felt far away. Why would you? My voice cracked. Why would you do that without me? He didn't answer. He just stood there, breathing hard. His jaw clenched like he was holding back a flood. My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the counter. You buried your father, I said slowly, trying to make sense of it. You buried him alone. Daniel's lips trembled. He didn't want a fuss. You were breaking, Mom. I couldn't. Stop. I shook my head, tears burning hot. You took that from me, I whispered. You took my last goodbye. He opened his mouth to speak, but I turned away, pressing a trembling hand over my mouth to hold back a sob. The clock ticked louder. The world felt suddenly too small, too heavy. In that moment, I didn't see a man trying to protect me. I saw a son who had buried not just his father, but our closure, our connection, our shared grief. And neither of us knew how to dig it back up. If someone you loved made a painful choice to protect you, would you forgive them or resent them for it? Tell me in the comments below. The sound of his confession still hung in the room, thick as smoke. I buried him yesterday. Every syllable echoed against the walls like it had been carved into them. I gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. The rain outside grew louder, or maybe it was my pulse in my ears. My body didn't know whether to collapse or scream. Why? Came out smaller than I intended, almost childlike. He looked down at his boots, water pooling beneath them. Because I couldn't wait anymore. The words struck like lightning, quick, sharp, unforgiving. You couldn't wait. I repeated. My voice trembled. Daniel, your father was my husband for 30 years. You don't just put a man in the ground without his wife. His jaw flexed, and for the first time he looked at me, really looked. You weren't ready, he said, voice shaking but firm. You couldn't even say his name without crying, Mom. You weren't eating, you weren't sleeping, you just stopped. Someone had to do something. I was grieving. Shouted. You think I wanted to just sit here and pretend he wasn't gone? He stepped forward, frustration flashing behind his tears. No, I think you wanted to pretend he was still here. You wouldn't even let me move his shoes from the hallway. Flinched. His voice cracked. Silence swallowed the room again. The rain softened to a whisper against the glass, as if the sky itself was listening. Daniel turned away first, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. I couldn't stand seeing you like that, he said, quieter now. Every time I looked at you, I saw myself. That sentence landed differently. He wasn't just angry. He was broken. I wanted to reach out to him, to pull him into my arms the way I used to when he was little. But my pride, my grief, anchored my hands to my sides. Instead, I whispered, So you thought burying him alone would fix that? He didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, staring out into the rain. The dim reflection of his face looked like a ghost's. He hated funerals, he said finally. You remember. He used to say they were for the living, not the dead. I did remember. Richard had said that once, half-jokingly, when a neighbor passed away. But that had been before illness, before silence, before the empty chair at the dinner table became a permanent fixture. I don't care what he said, I whispered. I needed to say goodbye. He turned back toward me then, his eyes shining wet. So did I, Mom. That's why I did it. For a moment neither of us spoke. The house creaked softly, as if it too was exhaling. I carried the box, he continued, his voice trembling. It was light. Too light. I kept thinking that a man like Dad shouldn't weigh so little. Didn't feel right. But I couldn't stop. I kept digging because Because I thought if I stopped, I'd never start again. My breath caught. His hands were shaking now, his knuckles pale. I didn't mean to shut you out, he said, choking on the words. I just thought I could take the pain away from you. I stepped forward, the distance between us closing until I could see the rawness in his eyes. You can't take it away, I whispered. You can only share it. His lips parted as though he wanted to respond, but he couldn't. His throat worked soundlessly before he turned away again, wiping at his eyes. The quiet that followed was unbearable. I could feel my heart breaking, not just for my husband but for the boy in front of me trying so hard to be a man. Daniel, I said softly, do you even know how hard it is for a mother to see her child carrying more than he can bear? He turned back toward me, tears streaking his face. Do you know how hard it is to watch your mother fall apart and not be able to fix it? The air cracked between us again, this time not from anger but from truth. We stood there, two people held together by blood and grief and the unbearable weight of silence. He sat down at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. I wanted to sit beside him but my legs wouldn't move. So instead I watched him, seeing the boy who once built forts in the living room, the teenager who refused to hug goodbye, the man who just buried his father in the quiet dawn. I didn't do it right, he muttered through his palms. There was no prayer, no flowers. It was me. I thought maybe that would make it easier, but it didn't. I swallowed back a sob. You should have let me come. He shook his head. I couldn't. I didn't want you to see me fall apart. And now I'm watching it anyway, I said softly. He lifted his head slowly. For a moment our eyes met across the room. His filled with guilt, mine with exhaustion. There were no villains here. Just two people trying to survive the same loss in different ways. But love and grief, they don't always speak the same language. The rain began to fade. The last drops tapped softly against the windows like a heartbeat slowing down. Daniel stood as if to leave, but hesitated. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, voice breaking. I really thought I was doing the right thing. I wanted to forgive him in that moment. I wanted to step forward to tell him I understood. But the wound was too new, too raw. So instead I said the only truth I could manage. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. But I know you didn't mean to hurt me. He nodded once, quietly. That's enough for now. Then he walked toward the door. When it closed behind him, the silence that followed was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. If you were Daniel, would you have buried your father alone to protect your mother, or faced the pain together? Share your thoughts below. Someone else may need your perspective. The next morning the house was quiet again. Too quiet. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was heavier than before. Daniel didn't come home that night. I didn't call. I told myself he needed space, but the truth was, I didn't know what to say anymore. The kettle whistled again like it always did. I turned it off before it screamed. The kitchen clock ticked. The sound had started to feel like a second heartbeat in the house, mocking the absence of the one that had stopped. I sat by the window, staring out at the yard. The soil where Richard used to grow his roses was dark and uneven now. Daniel had promised to fix it after the rain. But that promise, like so many lately, was left unfinished. Down the road, Daniel's truck sat parked outside the small-town diner. Inside, he stirred his coffee until it went cold, not tasting it. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face. Or worse, his mother's when she heard the truth. He wanted to drive away, maybe head toward the city, start fresh. But guilt has a long reach. It sits in the passenger seat no matter where you go. He looked at his reflection in the diner's window. Dark eyes, stubble, exhaustion. He barely recognized the man staring back. A waitress approached. Refill. He nodded. Rough day, she asked gently. Daniel forced a smile. Something like that. She gave a sympathetic nod, setting down the pot. My mama always said grief's like mud. It sticks until you decide to wash it off. He didn't reply. How do you wash off something that's under your skin? Back at home, I tried to keep busy. I dusted the shelves again, rearranged the photo frames. In one of them, our wedding day, Richard's arm was around me, his eyes sparkling like he always knew the punchline before anyone else. I pressed my fingertips against the glass. I wasn't ready to let you go, I whispered. The air didn't answer. Never did. When I turned, I noticed something missing. His funeral suit. The one I'd folded and placed in the closet weeks ago. I searched every drawer, every hanger. A sick realization began to creep in. Daniel hadn't just buried his father. He'd taken him. He'd planned it. The tears I'd been holding back began to slip free. My chest felt hollow, my breath uneven. Why hadn't he told me? Did he think I was that fragile? That my love couldn't handle the weight of goodbye? I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching Richard's watch. His favorite one, the one Daniel gave him last Christmas. The second hand still ticked. That sound again. Like time reminding me that it keeps moving, even when I don't. Daniel drove past the cemetery that evening but didn't stop. He couldn't. The image of the grave, fresh soil, no flowers, haunted him. He'd meant to bring some wild daisies, the kind his mom liked. But every time he picked them, he froze. His hands would tremble and he'd drop them. He thought of calling her. He even took out his phone, thumb hovering over her number. But he couldn't press call. What would he say? That he was sorry again. That the guilt felt like a noose tightening each morning. That he wasn't sleeping, eating, or even breathing right anymore. Instead, he shoved the phone back into his pocket and drove toward the lake. His father's favorite fishing spot. There, under the orange-pink sky. He finally let the tears come. They weren't loud or dramatic. Just quiet, steady. The kind of tears that come when the body can't keep pretending anymore. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I was just trying to make it right." Home, I was writing a letter. Not to Daniel. Not yet. To Richard. I wrote about the silence. About how the days stretched too long, how our son had changed. I wrote about the fight, about Daniel's confession, about how love can turn into hurt without meaning to. Halfway through, the ink smeared from my tears. I stopped writing and closed my eyes. I could almost hear his voice again. Deep, steady, calm. "Evie," he used to say, "don't let pride build walls between you and the boy. You'll regret it." He'd been right about so many things. That night I dreamed of him. We were in the garden. He was tending to his roses, humming that same old tune he always hummed when he was content. He looked up at me, smiled, and said, "The boy means well. He just doesn't know how to carry pain without breaking." When I woke, the pillow was damp. The air smelled faintly of roses, though there were none left in bloom. The next morning I made 2 cups of tea. One for me. One for Daniel, though I knew he wouldn't come. But something in me refused to stop waiting. Waiting was the only hope I had left. Outside, the early sun spilled through the window, warming the kitchen. It was a fragile kind of light, hopeful but not yet steady. I looked at the empty chair across from me and whispered, "We're not done yet, you and me, my boy." He sat by the lake with his father's old fishing rod beside him. The line drifted loose in the water, untouched. He whispered into the quiet morning, "She'll never forgive me." Then, as if the wind carried a response, he heard something faint. His father's voice in memory. "Forgiveness is born where love refuses to die." Daniel blinked hard. A tear slipped down his cheek. He stood, took the rod, and started walking home. When hurt runs deep between people who love each other, do you believe time alone can heal it, or does someone have to take the first step? Leave your thoughts below. Morning came gray and still. The storm had passed, but the air inside the house carried its aftertaste. Wet, heavy, uneasy. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, both hands cupped around a mug that had gone cold an hour ago. Across from him, I sat quietly, eyes fixed on the faint candle wax stains from the night before. We hadn't spoken much since the lights came back on. The silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was tired. When you've spent too long holding in pain, even silence begins to ache. Finally I said it. You said he didn't want a fuss. Daniel looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. That's what he told me, he said. Before it happened. I frowned. Before what happened? He swallowed hard. His fingers trembled as he set the mug down. The night he died, he said softly. He called me. My breath hitched. I leaned forward. You were with him. He nodded. He called from the garage. Said he didn't feel right. I drove over. By the time I got there, he was sitting on the floor, pale. He tried to stand up, but he stopped. His voice broke. I held him, he whispered. He just kept saying, take care of her, Danny. Promise me you won't let her break. And then he was gone. Tears burned my eyes. I pressed my hand to my chest. I hadn't known. I thought Richard had been alone when he passed. Daniel's gaze fell to the table. He told me he didn't want a funeral. He didn't want people pretending they cared when they barely showed up while he was alive. He just wanted peace. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges worn soft from being held too many times. I found this in his jacket pocket after. His voice cracked. I couldn't bring myself to read it at first. Then I did. It was for you. He slid the paper across the table. My hand shook as I took it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sharp, steady, unmistakably his. I traced the ink with my thumb before unfolding it. The letter read, My Evie, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you in person. I'm sorry for that. You deserved more than silence, more than the kind of love I gave you through work and worry. I know I wasn't the easiest man to live with. I shut down when I should have opened up. I thought being strong meant being quiet. I see now that it only built walls between me and the two people I loved most. If Danny's the one to find this, tell him I'm proud of him. He has your heart even when he hides it behind mine. Take care of each other. Don't let grief make strangers of you. You were my peace, Evie. You still are. Always, Richard. The paper blurred through my tears. I pressed the letter to my chest, choking on a sob I'd been holding for weeks. Daniel's voice was barely audible. I didn't show you because I thought it would break you. I shook my head, tears falling freely now. No, Danny. It's the not knowing that broke me. He lowered his gaze, guilt etched deep into his features. I just wanted to do what he asked, to protect you. But after I buried him, it didn't feel like protecting anymore. It felt like hiding. The air between us felt lighter, though our eyes were heavy with tears. I reached out, hesitant at first, and laid my hand over his. It was the first time we'd touched since the day Richard died. His hand was rough, calloused, trembling. He didn't pull away. I wish you hadn't done it alone, I whispered. He looked up, eyes glistening. I didn't want you to see him like that. I already saw the worst, I said. Losing both of you to silence. For a long moment we just sat there, the letter between us, a bridge built from regret and love. Outside, sunlight broke through the thinning clouds, spilling soft gold across the table. I thought you hated me, Daniel said quietly. I thought you stopped needing me, I replied. We both smiled, tired, cracked smiles, but real ones. I stood, taking the letter in my hands. He said we shouldn't let grief make strangers of us. Daniel nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time we stop acting like strangers. Something inside me loosened. For the first time in weeks, breathing didn't hurt as much. That evening, we went together to the small shed behind the house. Daniel unlocked a wooden box tucked beneath the workbench. Inside were the things he couldn't bring himself to part with. Dad's fishing cap, his wedding band, a photograph of the three of us by the lake when Daniel was 10. I smiled through tears. He loved that day. Daniel nodded. He said it was the last time he saw you laugh without worry. I looked at him, realizing how much of his father lived in him. His steadiness, his quiet love, his guilt. I placed the letter in the box with the rest. We'll keep him here, I said softly. Where we both can find him. He nodded. Together this time. As night fell, the house no longer felt haunted. Just quiet, the kind of quiet that follows peace instead of pain. We sat by the window, watching fireflies blink in the wet grass. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. You think he can see us? He asked. I hope so, I said. Because I think he's finally smiling. If you discovered a letter from someone you lost, one written just for you, would you want to read it right away, or would you wait until your heart was ready? Tell me below. The morning light felt different, softer somehow, kinder. For the first time since Richard's passing, the house didn't feel like a mausoleum. The air was warmer, touched with the faint scent of cinnamon and rain-soaked wood. Daniel was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cracking eggs into a bowl. The sight of him there startled me, not because he was cooking but because he was humming. It was the same tune his father used to hum when he made breakfast on Sundays. The sound floated through the air like sunlight after weeks of gray. I leaned on the doorway. You remembered that? He turned, startled, a shy grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Guess it's stuck in my head. You never liked eggs, I said. I still don't, he replied. But you do. I smiled, the kind that trembles before it finds its footing. You're learning. He shrugged. Trying. When he set the plate in front of me, the smell hit. Butter, salt, the faint toast of the pan. Simple things, but they tasted like life. We ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't the brittle kind anymore. It was full, a silence that held peace instead of pain. After breakfast, Daniel put on one of Richard's old records, crackling jazz that filled the corners of the room. I froze when the needle caught, and the familiar notes swelled through the house. That's his favorite, I whispered. Daniel nodded. I know. For a moment I felt him there, not in body but in memory. The way he'd tap his fingers on the counter, the way he'd wink at me when a certain saxophone note hit. Daniel looked over at me and smiled. You used to dance to this. I laughed softly. With your father, yes. He stood, held out his hand awkwardly. Then dance with me. I blinked, surprised. Oh no, Come on, he said, grinning now. He'd want you to. The laughter that spilled from me was light, real, unforced. I took his hand, and for the first time in months I moved. We swayed in the living room, clumsy and quiet. He was taller than his father, broader in the shoulders, but when he smiled, he had that same crooked joy. The record popped, a familiar crackle between beats. I felt tears prick my eyes but didn't fight them. Daniel noticed. You okay? I nodded, resting my head briefly against his chest. Yes. For the first time in a while I think I am. He tightened his arm around me just slightly. Me too. Later we sat on the back porch. The sky stretched wide and clean, the storm's memory washed away. Birds chirped as if the world had been reset. Daniel leaned back, legs stretched out, eyes closed against the sunlight. I studied him quietly, the faint shadows under his eyes, the tiredness still lingering but softer now. He broke the silence first. You ever think Dad knew this would happen? What do you mean? Yes. He shrugged. The way he left everything written down. A letter. It's like he knew we'd need something to bring us back together. Smiled. That sounds like him. Always planning, even from the grave. We both laughed, the sound light, incredulous, healing. Then he grew quiet again. I used to think being strong meant keeping everything inside, he said. But when I buried him, it felt like I was burying myself too. I nodded slowly. Grief does that. It buries the living along with the dead, unless we let the light in. He turned his head, smiling faintly. You sound like him. Maybe I finally understand him, I said softly. We spent the afternoon sorting through old boxes in the attic, the ones neither of us had dared to open before. Inside were fragments of a life. A baseball glove Daniel had outgrown, postcards from our honeymoon, A jar of screws labeled, "Might need someday." Every item told a story, and every story brought laughter between tears. At one point, Daniel pulled out a photo album. "Look at this," he said, showing me a picture of him at 8 years old, holding up a lopsided cake. "Dad told me it was perfect. I think it was still raw inside." I laughed so hard my sides hurt. "He ate 2 pieces just to prove it was good." Daniel grinned. "He probably regretted it later." "Definitely." For the first time, the memories didn't sting. They warmed. That evening, as the sun dipped low, we sat in the living room again. The record had stopped, leaving behind a gentle hum of static. Daniel glanced at the old framed photo of our family on the mantel. "You think he'd be proud of us?" I followed his gaze, smiling through the ache. "He already said he was. In that letter." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Guess I just needed to hear it out loud." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then let me say it. He'd be proud, Daniel. And so am I." His shoulders dropped, his breath shuddering out. "Thanks, Mom." The way he said it, soft, full, like he hadn't said it in years, made my chest tighten. That night, as I watched him head upstairs, I felt something in the house shift. It wasn't silence anymore. It was peace. For the first time since Richard's death, I whispered good night and meant it. I sat by the window a while longer, watching the last traces of sunset fade. Somewhere in that deepening quiet, I swore I could hear Richard's voice, faint but steady. "You did good, Evie. You both did." And I smiled through my tears, whispering back, "We're learning love. One day at a time." When grief begins to ease, what's the first small thing that makes you feel alive again? Laughter, music, or the touch of someone you love? Share your moment below. It might help someone still in the dark. The peace lasted only 3 days. Then came the phone call. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number, local. I hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Hart," a woman's voice said. "This is Martha from St. James Parish Cemetery. I just wanted to confirm the relocation request for Richard Hart's remains." My blood went cold. "I'm sorry, what?" She repeated herself slowly. "The request to move your husband's burial to the family plot on Maple Hill. Your son Daniel filed it yesterday." The world tilted. "He what?" "Yes, ma'am. We just need your signature to finalize." But I'd already hung up. By the time Daniel got home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, the letter from the cemetery spread out on the coffee table like an accusation. He froze when he saw it. "Mom, I can explain." "Go ahead," I said, my voice tight, sharp, trembling. "Explain why you're moving your father's grave without even telling me." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not like that. I just thought." "No, Daniel," I cut in. "You didn't think. You just acted like always." He stepped closer, frustration flaring in his eyes. "I'm trying to fix things. The plot on Maple Hill. It's where Grandpa and Grandma are. Dad should be there too. And you couldn't talk to me first," said standing. "You made me believe we were finally doing this together." "I didn't want to upset you again," he said, his voice cracking. "You've only just started sleeping, Mom. I didn't want to stir it all back up." My anger trembled on the edge of heartbreak. "Do you hear yourself? You keep deciding for me, like I'm some fragile thing you have to manage." He looked away. "Because I can't lose you too." That stopped me cold. The way he said it, small, almost broken. But pain has a way of turning empathy into armor. I crossed my arms. "You won't lose me, Daniel. You just keep pushing me away." He stepped forward, pleading now. "I thought you'd understand. I thought maybe if we gave Dad a real place, we could both move on." "Move on," I repeated, my voice rising. "You think moving his body will move my heart? That's not healing, that's running." His jaw tightened. "Maybe you're the one who's running, Mom." The words hit like a slap. Froze. "What did you just say?" He swallowed hard, eyes full of regret, but the damage was done. You hold on to him like he's still here. You talk to his chair, you leave his things untouched, like you want to stay in the grief. Tears filled my eyes, hot and instant. You buried your father without me, Daniel. You don't get to tell me how to grieve. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Finally he just said, "I'm sorry," and turned toward the door. "Don't walk away from me." I shouted, but it was too late. The door slammed, and the echo rattled through the house like thunder. That night, the loneliness returned, heavier than ever, because this time it was layered with disappointment. The clock ticked again. The rhythm mocked me. Time was moving, but we weren't. I picked up Richard's letter again, tracing the ink until the words blurred. "Don't let grief make strangers of you." We were strangers again. Daniel sat in his truck on the roadside, engine off, fists pressed to his forehead. He wanted to turn back, but pride, that old poisonous friend, kept him still. He punched the steering wheel once hard and whispered, "I didn't mean it." His eyes stung. He hadn't cried since the night of the burial, but the tears came anyway, raw and ugly. "Dad, I tried," he muttered into the darkness. "I swear I tried." He looked up at the sky, at the faint stars fighting through the clouds. "Why do I always mess it up?" The only answer was the wind. Back home, I sat at the dining table long into the night. The candle flickered low, casting soft shadows across the walls. Beside me sat the photo of our family, 3 smiles frozen in time. I whispered to it, as if the picture could listen. "He's just like you, you know. Stubborn as a mountain. But he's got your heart." My voice broke. "He thinks he's failing me, Richard. But I'm the one who's failing him." Sometime after midnight, I opened the back door and stepped out into the cold air. The grass was damp under my feet. From the porch I could see the garden, the one Daniel promised to fix. The soil was uneven still, but new green shoots were poking through. Tiny, fragile, but alive. I knelt, pressing my fingers into the dirt, and whispered, "Help me fix this, love. I don't know how." For a moment it felt like the air shifted, soft, warm, familiar. And in that fragile quiet, I thought I heard his voice again. "Then start with forgiveness." Daniel spent the night at the lake, where he and his father used to fish. He barely slept, the letter still folded in his pocket. He took it out again, running his thumb over the creases. He read the words aloud to the night. "Take care of her, Danny. Promise me you won't let her break." He whispered, "I broke her, Dad." The wind picked up across the water, carrying the faint scent of rain again. And for the first time Daniel realized something. Maybe keeping her from pain wasn't protecting her. Maybe it was keeping her from healing. He started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness. He was going home. Have you ever said something in anger to someone you love, and wished you could take it back? What stopped you from saying, "I'm sorry," right away? Let's talk about that below. The morning came pale and fragile, like it wasn't sure it wanted to begin. I hadn't slept. The night had been full of whispers, the kind you can't quite tell are memory or guilt. The house still smelled like rain, and the silence felt heavier than it had in weeks. The letter lay open on the table again, next to the cold cup of tea I hadn't touched. I kept reading that one line over and over. "Take care of each other. Don't let grief make strangers of you." It was almost cruel, how love could be both the wound and the cure. Across town, Daniel's truck rolled slowly through the fog. He hadn't gone home all night. He'd sat at the lake, reading his father's letter until dawn, every word cutting deeper, but also clearing something inside him. He realized he'd been protecting his mother from himself, from his own guilt, his own helplessness. And maybe that was why they kept hurting each other, because neither of them could bear to say out loud what they really felt. "I'm scared to lose you too." He gripped the steering wheel, jaw tight. "Just go home," he muttered to himself. "Fix it before it's too late." When I heard the truck pull into the driveway, my chest tightened. I didn't move. Part of me wanted to run to the door. Another part whispered, "Not again. Don't let him see you cry." The knock came soft, hesitant. Then his voice. "Mom." I swallowed hard but stayed quiet. Another pause. Then, "Please. Just, please open the door." Something in his voice broke me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't guilt. It was fear, raw, small, and familiar. The same sound he'd made as a boy when he'd fallen off his bike and tried not to cry. "Open the door." He stood there, drenched from the morning mist, eyes red, holding something in his hand. "I went to the cemetery," he said. "I cancelled the transfer." I exhaled shakily, relief and sorrow twisting together. He held up the folded letter, the one from his father. "I took this with me. I needed him to tell me what to do." "What did he say?" I asked softly. He smiled weakly. "That I'm an idiot." That made me laugh. An unexpected broken laugh that escaped like sunlight through cracks. "He probably did." Daniel's voice trembled. "I shouldn't have done it, Mom. Any of it. I just—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was make you feel alone. I didn't bury Dad for him. I buried him because I couldn't stand seeing you hurt. I was angry at myself for not saving him that night, and I took it out on you." Tears blurred my vision. I stepped closer. "You tried to save him, Daniel. You did." He shook his head. I froze. He told me to call 911, but I just held him. I was too scared. By the time I did, it was too late. He looked away, jaw trembling. I keep replaying it, thinking if I'd just moved faster. I reached out and took his face in both hands, forcing him to look at me. "Listen to me. Your father died with you beside him. That's not failure, sweetheart. That's love." His breath hitched. His eyes searched mine like he didn't believe he deserved those words. "I've been so angry," I admitted. "At you. At him. God." But underneath it all I was just scared. Scared of losing you too. We stood there in the open doorway, both trembling, both breaking in slow motion, but together this time. Daniel took a step forward, voice cracking. "I don't want to run anymore, Mom. I just want to come home." My throat tightened. "Then come in," I whispered. He did. The simple act, stepping across that threshold, felt like an entire chapter turning. We sat down at the table again, the letter between us. The light through the window was soft, almost golden, touching the edges of his face. "I cancelled the move," he said again quietly. "I know," I replied. "And I forgive you." He let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. "Just like that." "No," I said gently. "Not just like that. But forgiveness isn't about waiting for perfect timing. It's about choosing love before it fades." He nodded, his eyes wet. "You sound like Dad again." Then maybe he's finally getting through to both of us. For a long time we just sat there, the silence no longer empty but alive. Then Daniel said softly, "You think we can visit him today?" Smiled. "I'd like that." He stood, hesitated, then stepped closer and hugged me. It wasn't the careful, one-armed hug of politeness. It was the desperate, clinging kind, the kind you give when words aren't enough. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my shoulder. "I know," I said. "So am I." We stayed like that for a long time. The kind of long that resets something inside you. Later, as we drove toward the cemetery together, the world outside looked washed clean, fields glistening, the sky stretching wide. He reached across the seat, and without looking I took his hand. Felt steady, strong, familiar. Somewhere I thought Richard was smiling, not because we'd finally stopped grieving, but because we'd finally started living again. When two people love each other but both are hurting, who do you think should take the first step? The one who caused the pain or the one brave enough to forgive? Let's hear your thoughts below. The air at St. James Parish was still that afternoon, the kind of quiet that feels sacred. Soft wind brushed through the oak trees, scattering gold and rust-colored leaves across the narrow path. Daniel walked beside me, carrying a small bundle of white lilies. His hands were steady, his stride slow. He carried the letter, the one Richard had written to me, folded carefully, as if it were made of glass. When we reached the grave, I felt my chest tighten, not from grief this time, but from the weight of memory. The soil had settled. The grass had started to grow back. The simple headstone bore his name and 2 words beneath it: beloved husband, father. I knelt and ran my fingers along the carved letters. You'd probably tell us we took long enough, I whispered. Daniel gave a quiet laugh, kneeling beside me. Yeah. He'd roll his eyes and say, about time you two stopped acting like strangers. Smiled. He would. We placed the lilies at the base of the stone. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full, warm, alive. Finally, Daniel said, I used to hate this place. Why? Asked. Because it felt like an ending. But now it feels like he's just here. Waiting. He nodded. That's because he is. In all the ways that matter. We sat there for a long while. The sunlight slipped gently between the trees, resting on the grave like a blessing. Daniel looked down at the letter in my hands. You're gonna leave it? Yes, I said softly. It belongs here now. I unfolded it one last time and read it aloud, my voice shaking but steady. You were my peace, Evie. You still are. Take care of each other. Don't let grief make strangers of you. When I finished, I pressed the letter into the earth. The wind picked up, curling the edges before it settled still again, like the world was listening. Daniel placed his hand over mine. He'd be proud of us, he said. I looked at him. He already is. We stayed there until the light began to fade, talking quietly. About him, about us, about the little things that used to make up our life. He told me stories I'd never heard. How Richard used to sneak him extra cash before dates. How he'd once fallen asleep in the truck waiting for Daniel to finish football practice. I laughed so hard I cried, and when I cried, Daniel laughed softly too. It felt good. That strange mix of sorrow and joy. Like healing had finally found its rhythm. As we walked back to the truck, I stopped halfway down the path. The air had changed, cooler, sweeter somehow. I turned back once more toward the grave. I'll love you forever, I whispered. Then softly to Daniel, let's go home. He nodded, slipping his arm around my shoulders as we walked. For the first time, the house waiting for us didn't feel empty. That evening, the sun dipped low, painting the world in warm orange light. The house, once a tomb of silence, now hummed with the sound of life again. The kettle whistled, the clock ticked, and Daniel was fixing the garden like he'd promised months ago. I watched from the window as he knelt in the dirt, hands covered in soil, planting new rose stems in the same patch his father had tended for years. Hey Mom, he called out. You remember what Dad said about the roses? I smiled, leaning against the doorframe. He said they only bloom when you stop checking on them every hour. Daniel chuckled. Then I guess we'll just have to be patient. I walked out, kneeling beside him. He'd like that, I said softly. Seeing us here, working side by side. Daniel glanced up, eyes soft with emotion. Yeah, he would. We planted the last stem together, our hands brushing. It was a small thing, dirt, roots, hope, but it felt sacred. When we finished, Daniel stood, brushing off his knees. You think they'll bloom? They will, I said. They always do. Even after the frost. That night, I sat by the window again. The same one where I'd watched the rain so many lonely nights before. But this time I wasn't alone. The roses outside were just small green stems now. Fragile but alive. I sipped my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. On the table beside me, a candle flickered. The same one that had burned the night the storm hit. Its flame danced steady and sure. I smiled and whispered into the quiet. We're okay now, love. You can rest. The flame swayed once, as if in answer. Later, Daniel came downstairs, holding an old photo, one of the three of us by the lake. The sun behind us, all laughter and light. He set it on the mantel, right above the letter's empty space. "There," he said softly. "Right where he belongs." We stood together, watching the photo in silence. "Mom," he said after a long moment. "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for forgiving me." I turned to him, smiling. "Thank you for coming home." He pulled me into a hug, long, wordless, full of everything we couldn't say. And as the clock ticked, the world felt right again. Not perfect, not painless, but real and whole. Outside, the first rosebud opened under the moonlight. Small, trembling, radiant. Promise, maybe, that love doesn't end with death. Simply changes its shape.
Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this video, and I'm confident you enjoyed it. We've got plenty more exciting and heartwarming stories waiting for you. Just click on the image on your screen to watch the next one.